Welcome everyone to TAM Lab number 43. Today we're excited to have Kevin Moats joining us. He's going to be going through an NSX Intelligence demo overview within his home lab. So we're excited to have Kevin joining us here today. And with that, I will stop sharing and I'm going to hand it over to Kevin and he can take it away.
All right, perfect. In the meantime, my stuff did start working after the power outage today, so we should be in good shape. Thanks for kicking that over, and let me get my PowerPoint going here. Cool. Everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah, looks good.
All right, perfect. So cool. Well, good afternoon or good morning, wherever everyone may be. My name is Kevin Moats. I am a staff networking and security technical account manager here at VMware. Been on the networking and security side of the house for about a year now. I reside in Columbus, Ohio, and as Steve mentioned, I will be going through the NSX Intelligence in my home lab today. So I do have just a little bit of slideware because there's some install portions of this that I didn't want to try to do live just because of the time-consuming nature of it. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to stop and ask. I'd like to make this as interactive as possible. So basically, I'm just going to go through, real quick, what is NSX Intelligence. Then I'm going to talk about how I was able to install it into my home lab with limited resources, because it's a pretty heavy appliance from a resource perspective. Then I'm going to kind of go through a quick 3-tier app topology review of a 3-tier app that I use for testing that I do customer facing and that I'm going to do as part of this presentation today. Then I'm going to show you NSX Intelligence in action. And then I'm going to talk about a couple issues that I ran into getting this deployed into my home lab and some gotchas and things to watch out for in case anybody else wants to do the same in their home lab. So first off, what is NSX Intelligence? So NSX Intelligence is an analytics engine that is made to basically look at the workflows within an NSX-T environment and then place analytics on that. And long term, the team wants to expand this out to be an entire, data center wide tool and have visibility not just inside NSX-T, but also, outside of that, pulling in flows from regular distributed switching and potentially, physical platforms someday. So this is a 1.0 release for those that aren't aware. It shipped with the NSX-T 2.5 version. So NSX Intelligence itself is really a 1.0 product. So here's just a quick slide. I know it's a little blurry because I screenshotted it from another deck that just kind of talks about how NSX Intelligence is different than vRealize Network Insight and kind of where each one can be utilized and by what teams, right? So NSX Intelligence is really for security and operations. Use cases are, to make rule recommendations, inside of an NSX deployment. And then it uses the policy repository for self-defined, firewall capability. Whereas vRealize Network Insight is more for kind of, the operations team. It's for app modeling, micro-segmentation planning, so on and so forth, but it doesn't actually go out and make the rules for you. And I think that's what's so cool about NSX Intelligence is it's going to recommend and then apply the rules within the NSX-T platform for you. Which is something that vRNI does not yet do, and I don't know where we're at, as far as roadmap is on vRNI being able to actually, make those rules. But it makes recommendations, but doesn't really go out and make them for you. So the NSX Intelligence vision, real quickly, this is the 1.0 release, and this includes basically the data platform and the visualization and visibility portion, as well as the security rule and grouping recommendations, which is the piece that I'm going to show everyone today. Future stage, they're looking to enhance the NSX Intelligence platform by doing more with security and analytics from outside of NSX-T, and then starting to do some anomaly detection, as well as the full NSX domain at scale. So right now it's limited, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well, as far as the scale that it can go after and make rules against. Stage 3 beyond that is to do additional security functionality, multi-platform support, and then really reaching further outside of even the vSphere platform from what I understand long term. And then stage 4 is going to be across all VMware networking and the entire security portfolio, and then ultimately moving into potentially a SaaS delivery model. So right now it's an appliance that needs to be installed within your own environment. So today, to deploy NSX Intelligence, you have to deploy an appliance. You have to have NSX-T up and running first, and then you deploy the appliance within the NSX-T manager platform, and it goes and deploys the appliance for you. There's two different sizes of that right now. There is the small and large. The small is really for POC and evaluations only, which is what I'm running in my home lab. And then the large is production ready today, but it does have some scale limitations that I'll talk about here in a moment. The small VM is 16 virtual processors and 64 gigs of RAM, and it's 2 terabytes, but it is thin provisioned, thank goodness, when it does deploy that for you. Once again, that's POC only. And then the large version is 32 virtual CPUs and 128 gigs of RAM for production use. And I do want to note that when the appliance is deployed, it deploys it with CPU and memory reservations in place and then tries to immediately power it on. And I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into that here in a moment. So the difference between the small and large appliance as far as usage goes is really how much workload it can handle. So essentially the small appliance can handle a number of 50 ESXi hosts, 2,000 virtual machines, 100 recommendation jobs, and 250,000 flows at 5-minute intervals. And then it retains about a month's worth of data within the system. The large size is 100 hosts, 5,000 VMs, 100 recommendation jobs, which is the same, 500,000 flows at the 5-minute intervals, and still only retains 1 month. And there's a link here on the bottom. I'll make sure I share this deck out with the TAM Lab team to send out to everybody after the fact if you guys wanted to go into Config Max and look up any of the other information on this. So this is how I was able to install the appliance with limited resources in my own environment, my home lab. First off, my home lab, as far as the portion I play with to test with customers and everything else that's not production for my family, is really 2 HP Z620 workstations, each with 6 core single physical processor E5 2640s. And I've got 96 gigs of RAM in each one of them. I want to upgrade that to 128, which is what they're completely capable of with a single socket. I just haven't got around to ordering another 128 gigs of RAM to split between the two. So, as you can see, this was the host before I even deployed NSX Intelligence in my environment onto this host, and I was already using 61 gigs of memory, and only had about 34 left. And once again, it deploys with everything reserved. So essentially the first thing that you have to do before you can deploy NSX Intelligence is you have to host the OVF files yourself. So web hosting was fun, 15, 20 years ago, but now it's just like, I don't have a web server in the house. So I went looking around real quick to see what I could come up with, and I found this Phoenix, F-E-N-I-X web servers application that was free. Throw it on a Windows box, you give it a directory, and then it just lights up an HTTP web server that has a directory contents in it. So that's what I used and what worked for me. So I went out to the VMware.com site through the NSX-T download page and downloaded the NSX Intelligence 1.0 files. And that basically consisted of the 4 files that you see here. It was the OVF, the .mf, the .cert, and the .vmdk file that needed to be hosted up on to that platform. Once you have that hosted, you launch the NSX-T management console, and you go to the system tab at the top, and then the appliances on the left. And then there's this NSX Intelligence appliance window on the bottom, and there's a big button that you can click that says Add NSX Intelligence Appliance. So essentially you just go there, click the Add NSX Intelligence Appliance button, and then you're presented with a configuration screen. So the first configuration screen is the information of where the OVF file is located, as well as what you want to name it, the IP address, the gateway, DNS server, and NTP server information that you're going to use for that appliance. So you can see here at the top, my link is just a local web server, the 10.27.0.27. You have to point to the OVF file specifically, give the virtual appliance a name, IP address, so on and so forth. And then this is where you choose the size of the appliance. So I chose the small NSX Intelligence appliance, which once again is 16 virtual CPUs and 64 gigs of RAM, which was still too large to run in my environment, but we'll get there in a moment. Second screen that you're presented with is to basically select the compute manager within NSX-T that you've already got set up. to do the deployment of the NSX Intelligence appliance. I chose my Z620 cluster, and then I specifically chose a data store that was pinned to one host so that I knew what host it was going to deploy to, which is my M1 ESX5 server. And then you choose your port group that the appliance is going to be connected to. By default, the enable SSH and enable root access is disabled, but I chose to enable that because I wanted to see whatever information I could while this thing was deploying. Then the final screen for the appliance install is to just set your root password. Then it's nice here that they've got a checkbox to just go ahead and say, do the same password for the admin and the audit account as well. And then you just click the install appliance button. So once you do that, the NSX manager reaches out to vCenter. It starts automatically deploying the appliance, and just like any other appliance, the taskbar moves forward and it shows the percentage of completion for that appliance deployment. And what I found after trying to deploy it a couple of times is that it very quickly, once the appliance is deployed, NSX Manager tries to power that appliance on. And if the reservations are still set and the reservations exceed the capacity that you've got in your home lab or on the host, then it will fail to power on. And once it fails to power on, it basically just fails the install. And the only thing you can do inside the NSX Manager is choose to delete the installation and start the whole process over again. So all those screens that I showed you, you'd have to start over. So in my environment, you've got to be quick as a bunny, as I say here, and basically go edit the virtual machine settings after the appliance is completely deployed, but before NSX Manager tries to power it on. And in my environment, it basically was a 20-second period. So by the time the deploy OVF was complete at the 10:58 and 39 seconds in my example here, and by the time it powered on the virtual machine at 10:58:59 seconds, 20 seconds later, I had to get in there, right-click, go change my sockets from the amount of sockets down to 6, which is what I have in my environment, change the reservation to 0, and then remove the reservation on the memory and save that before it tried to power the appliance on. I'm sure you could probably do this with Power CLI, but I was kind of working quickly and I got it on, I think, the 3rd try, the first time I went to deploy this. And then after that, it basically just powers up and syncs with the NSX Manager, and you've got a successful install. So this is kind of the final step that I learned when it didn't work the first couple times on how to go check and see if it's going to be successful. And that is you can SSH in as the root account with the password that you set to the new appliance, or log in through the console and go to the var log pace directory, and then basically do a tail or a more on the token-registration.log. And then what you're looking for is what I've highlighted here at the bottom, and that's the registered successfully and server post registration was successful. So I've got some failure ones that we can go over at the end if we've got time on some failed deployments that I had that are actually in some of the gotchas and other reasons I've had the appliance fail. But essentially that's what the install process looks like to get NSX Intelligence up and running within the environment. Fun fact is,
quick question on the install, if I could.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Do you know what script is coming from the NSX Manager that is kicking off the NSX Intelligence VM, where it would be possible to go put a longer than 20-second delay in there prior to it trying to kick itself off?
No, I don't. I have not explored the NSX Manager itself to see where the scripting comes from or if there's any way to expand that. However, I have been working pretty closely with the product management team on a couple different things that I've discovered problem-wise, and Catherine might actually jump on today. And I've kind of made the request that they already had in place of having a third option that's for development use only, or a way for us to have it deployed without reservations. So it's something I think that they've got on their roadmap to either let us have internal to VMware, or maybe include with the product overall to basically say this is super test mode, out of supported parameters, but it's something they're looking into in order to do that for us.
Thank you.
Yep. No problem.
Kevin, I got one other question. So if you were deploying this in a production environment, what would have changed, outside of what you just showed us? Obviously, the reservation, you wouldn't be changing that. What about the web server requirement? I've never seen that before. Is that?
Yeah, that web server requirement is absolutely there, regardless of whether it's a demo or POC or production. So there's no way to go browse for the OVF files. You have to host the OVF files as of right now. And then
Okay.
on this first screen at the top, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, you
Yep.
have to actually put in the location that those OVF files reside. So yeah,
Okay.
that's true with the production install. The only difference between true production is that you would select the large NSX Intelligence appliance at this step,
Sure.
and it would deploy it as 32 and 128, and then it would still have reservations set at that point. So
Okay.
yeah. And then what I thought was interesting is it deployed 24 virtual processors, and I scaled it down to 6 and took the reservation off. And then my final success page here, it shows I was using 489% of the CPU, because I'm assuming that it's still basing its calculations off of 24 virtual CPUs allocated, and I only have 6. So I just thought that was a pretty cool number. I assume that in production it will be 100% or less. But in my home lab, this is the screen that's reflected. So that's a fun fact. All right, so that's basically the install process. I do want to quickly just go over the 3-tier app that I use for testing just before I get in and start using NSX Intelligence, so everybody's on the same page as far as the flows that we're going to see and the information. But is there any other questions on the install before I move forward?
I don't see anything in chat or the Q&A. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself.
All right, perfect. So the 3-tier app I use is the same 3-tier app that's used in the Hands-on Lab 2026-01 and 02. And basically it consists of 4 Photon-based virtual machines, 2 of which we call web servers, Web 01A, Web 02A, that reside on 172.16.10.0 logical segment, and then an application server that's on 172.16.20.0, and then a database that's on 172.16.30.0. Don't necessarily have to be segmented that way on separate segments, because microsegmentation applies to a single logical segment. It's just the way that I've got the 3-tier app built. The way the 3-tier app operates is you have whatever client with a web browser that you happen to be using, a Windows box, Linux box, whatever, that accesses one of the web servers on port 443. Once you access it on port 443, the web server then accesses the app server on port 8443, and then the app server accesses the database server on port 80, and basically returns the database information back to the client. So if the firewall rules are in place and all of the traffic is allowed, the application will work. If there's a breakdown anywhere in that process, then you are not returned the proper database, and then that way your flows are not working properly. All right, so that brings us to our live demo. So I'm going to stop sharing and share a different screen so that my resolution is a little better for everybody. Right, and can everybody see my NSX-T management screen?
Yep, looks good.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so things came up. I was telling the team here just before we got started that I had a power outage today, took my host down, and when I powered my NSX Manager and NSX Intelligence box up, things were not working, but they seem to be now, which is good.
You need UPS.
Yes, so I do have a UPS on all of the really important stuff. But
the production stuff.
The production stuff. Yeah. There's a whole other ball of wax. I'm an ISP for 3 of my neighbors, and so the UPS manages that stuff. That's a whole other story we won't get into.
Yeah, don't go there.
Yeah, exactly. So at any rate, so if we go to System and we go to Appliances, with any luck, everything's actually up properly. We've got the NSX Intelligence appliances showing here. It's currently utilizing 36 gigs of RAM and 8% of the CPU, which is good. And to kind of show you that 3-tier app is functioning, this is what the 3-tier app looks like when it functions. So if I hit refresh here, then we return this database, and that is on the .11, which is Web 1. And if we go to this one here to .12 and hit refresh, then we return that database as well. So we know that everything's working in the environment. Just to kind of show that off real quick to everyone, this is what the 3-tier app, the 3-tier app machines themselves look like. We got Web 01A. It resides on LS web, which is a NSX logical back segment. We got web 2, which is on the same, and then of course the app and the database. I'm not going to drill into those at the moment. So to just kind of show you how I've got security set up myself for demos before I dive into NSX Intelligence, basically what I've done in my environment is I have gone and grouped my virtual machines based on tagging. So I've got, first of all, the web 01A and web 02A. If we look at the tags, I've got a tag that's web and a tag that says 3-tier. Web 02 has the same tags, web and 3-tier. My database server and app server are very similar in that they're tagged 3-tier, but the database is tagged DB and the application server is tagged app. The reason I do that is because I've intelligently grouped the 3 different tiers themselves into 3 different groups. So my 3-tier app group, by using the tags, I've dynamically grouped app 01A, that virtual machine, into that group. And I've done the same with my database and also with the web tier. To show that a little further for those that are not familiar with NSX-T, if we edit the web tier here real quick, the way we done this is through criteria. And essentially I've set your virtual machine tag must equal web, and you must have a tag that equals 3-tier in order to be part of that group. So the reason I've grouped those together is because in my distributed firewall security portion of NSX-T, I have essentially already created rules for this whole 3-tier application because I, as a user, know how it works. So the very first rule that I've created is this web access, which is from any source to the 3-tier web group on HTTPS or HTTP. And I'm just applying that to the distributed firewall itself. From there, the web to app rule is on that 8443 that I talked about as far as that communication. And then finally, app to DB is on port 80 or HTTP. Now, if you notice, I have all of these rules disabled at the moment because my goal with NSX Intelligence was to see how close NSX Intelligence recommended rules that looked very much like what I tried to create for this app, knowing how the app operated. I've got this catch-all rule here at the bottom that I'm not going to dive into. That's kind of a methodology that I help customers use to create firewall rules. So now, without any further ado, we will actually go to NSX Intelligence itself. So once the appliance is installed, you go to the Plan Troubleshoot tab, and then you go to Discover and Take Action. And then this tab right here is essentially the NSX Intelligence data that's coming from the appliance. This doesn't exist until you deploy NSX Intelligence within NSX-T platform itself. So from a high level, it looks kind of messy, but we are actually seeing a whole bunch of flows here, and they're unprotected flows. So NSX Intelligence classifies flows into 3 different categories, essentially. There's unprotected, blocked, and allowed. So the reason that pretty much everything's showing unprotected in my environment is because what it determines as an unprotected flow is a flow that is being allowed within the NSX-T platform distributed firewall, but it doesn't have an explicit allow rule. Now, my NSX-T deployment is in blacklist mode, and what blacklist mode means is that my final rule is an allow any, and then you have to go make explicit deny rules if you want within the environment, as opposed to whitelist mode, which where the final rule is block all. So it does not account that final allow any rule as an allow rule, and is showing basically all of my flows for the most part as unprotected. And we'll probably find some that do show as allowed. I don't have any shown as blocked because I don't have any block rules in my environment. And we will start to see some allowed rules as long as the data is collecting okay since my power outage today. So this is kind of a high level view. It kind of groups things together, and then you can click on and look at some of these different flows, and it will show you the flows that it's seeing from that entity to the other. So for example, this one that I clicked on is seeing a bunch of unknown sources that are going to VDI 01 destination, and the destination group is this VDI pool 01, and we're seeing all the normal kind of network traffic chatter that you would see within a Windows environment like RPC, so on and so forth. Now, if we wanted to, we could, on the VDI pool, for example, we can right click this and say deep dive, which will now take us kind of into that group itself, and we will start to see all of the individual flows from the individual machines themselves. So I've got this M1 log, I've got this M1 Kevin machine, I've got Pi-hole machine, and I've got this VDI01 machine. And then we can start to look at the individual flows on these and click on them and see where the flows are coming from and going to. I'd also like to point out up here is we change our time frame. So we can say last hour, 12 hour, 24, week, or month. So if we go back to the last hour, don't really have any information because I just brought my machine back up. 12 hours, we're seeing that there was a little bit of traffic, but you can basically start filtering the traffic down by doing a much shorter time frame as opposed to last 24 hours or week or month or so on and so forth. So this view is good, but I found that it's a little overwhelming. Can be useful to kind of start to pinpoint applications and see the relationships between virtual machines. But the view that I actually prefer is the VMs view. So we can click up here and go to VMs, and then we can search what VMs we want to include in this search ourselves. So we'll select the components basically of our 3-tier web app. So I'll select my web servers, my app server, and my database server, for example, and hit apply. All right, so now we're starting to see some allowed flows as well as some unprotected flows. So if you remember how the flow worked for this 3-tier app, it was client to web, web to app, app to DB. And this 1027.05 is, this 10.502 is kind of a NAT address that everything looks like it's coming from in the environment to my NSX-T platform. So this flow right here from 10.502 to web 02 and to web 01, if we click on this, we can clearly see that it's the HTTPS protocol. So this is the client coming from an external source, accessing the web servers on that HTTPS port, just like we would expect. And it's showing it as an unprotected flow because the rules that I've created within the environment, I've got in an off state right now. So it's ignoring those rules. I have verified if I enable those rules, it does show this as a protected flow. And understands that that rule is already in place. So then from the web to the application server, we can see our expected traffic, which is that 8443 traffic. And we can see the same from web 02 as well as from web 01 directly over to the app server. And then from the app server, we can see the same thing to the database server. And sometimes, there it is, we get the flows layered on top of one another and they're hard to click on. And then so here's that HTTP, or that port 80 that's going from the app server to the database server. Now, if we click on more, essentially what this is doing is it's just searching the NSX database for all of the pre-configured services that include port 80, because it's not 100% certain what the protocol is. It just knows what the port is that it's using at this point, and the fact that it's TCP. So this could be, in its opinion, HTTP, could be Microsoft SQL reporting services, Vue 5.x, basically anything that includes that TCP port 80, if you will. All right, so now for the really cool part, or the part that I think brings the most value to the NSX Intelligent platform, and that is the recommendations themselves. So once we've kind of scoped this down to the environment that we want to operate on, like we did, and in this case, it was the virtual machines that make up the 3-tier app, we can click on this little magic wand up here, which is kind of our recommendations link, if you will. We'll go ahead and click on the Start New Recommendation. And then we can name this recommendation whatever we want. So we'll name it 3-tier-TAM Lab. And then here, if I wanted to, or if I forgot a virtual machine or decided I didn't want to include one, I can come into the environment and I can disclude or include any virtual machine within the NSX-T environment into this recommendation with this screen here. Under more options, basically I can just give it a description. And then this is where I can choose that time frame, whether I want to do the last month, week, 24 hours, 12, or 1. And what it's going to do by default is take the same, actually, no, it doesn't. I thought that took the same one as we had configured on here, but apparently it doesn't. So I'm going to go ahead and select the last 24 hours, which is what we were viewing on the screen. And then we say Start Discovery. So essentially what that does once we do that Start Discovery, this is where it really starts using the CPU. So what I found is normal operations, and as the environment churns and does its thing. The NSX Intelligence machine doesn't use a whole lot of CPU. However, when you run these recommendations, that's where the CPU really starts getting used. And my theory, and don't know for certain, but it seems accurate, is that this is now chewing on that recommendation to create the group's firewall rules and all of the recommendations that it's going to give us. So once you've done that, what it does is it places it over in this recommendations tab. So right here, I've got this 3-tier TAM Lab recommendation, and right now it says analyzing. And I'm willing to bet if we went over to this environment and found our NSX Intelligence machine and did a performance go to monitor. Probably going to start seeing the CPU pick up. Yep. So right here we saw the CPU pick up, and it's going to chew on this for maybe, in my environment, I don't know, about a minute or two before it's going to come back with a recommendation for us. So I'm going to pause there while we're waiting for that recommendation to move from analyzing to ready to publish, and answer any questions if anybody has any questions up to this point.
I have 2 questions, Kevin. So super powerful. I mean, this is really great stuff. I'm just curious, where does the data come from, right? When I think of like vRNI, I think of NetFlow data, and you configure the VDSs to send that data. But we didn't do anything like that. So can you speak to where the data is coming from, what kind of data, how does it get to the NSX Intelligence appliance, right? I mean, are there any requirements as far as which port group you put it on? Does it need to have network access to the host, for instance, or you know what I mean? Anything you can offer in that regard?
Yeah, sure. So I have verified that you do not have to place the NSX Intelligence appliance on an NSX prepped host. Because as a matter of fact, right now I'm not only one of my 2 hosts is NSX prepped. So it just has to have L3 network communication from the NSX Intelligence appliance to NSX Manager itself. And then from what I understand, basically NSX Manager is pulling the flow data directly from the ESXi host that it would normally pull just as NSX Manager operates in normal. And it's shipping all of that information over to the NSX Intelligence appliance, and then it is maintaining that in a database so that it can go through and chew on that. To further that, it will only show flow data on a source or destination that is on an NSX-T backed port group. So it must be on an NVDS that is utilizing either a VLAN or segment backed or overlay backed port group within the NSX environment. So it's not going to collect on anything outside of the NSX-T environment and show you anything. Now, if it is a source that's reaching out to a destination outside of NSX or outside of one of those port groups, it'll still see that flow because it was initiated from inside. And the same is in the reverse. If something from outside reaches in to a VM that's on there, it's going to show that flow data as well. It's just not going to show like 2 flows from one machine to another that are both outside of the NSX environment. Sure. The other part that I learned kind of accidentally in playing with this is that it also doesn't log connected flows only. It will actually log attempts. So when I first took the 3-tier app from the hands-on lab area and installed it in my home lab, there was a DNS server, which is called main console in the HOL environment. That's 192.168.110.10, I think. And I started seeing flows for DNS and all sorts of other things going to 192.168.110.10, and that machine didn't even exist in my environment. And what I figured out is it was those DNS requests, because it was still listed as a DNS server in the Photon machines, trying to reach out to that. So it is actually logging intended flows, not just established flows from the VMs that are on the NSX-T platform. I also did notice that under the IP fix, under collectors, we have this collector right here that got created as part of and this one here is no, that's not my NSX Intelligence. No, that's my vRNI, never mind. Thought there was a new one that showed up. Now it automatically created this one to my vRNI to show information that was from NSX-T. That's right. Never mind. Nothing showed up in here when I did NSX Intelligence. So
okay. And then my second question, and this is pretty detailed technical at this point, but just curious, the recommendations as it's, like you said, it's the CPU goes up as it's trying to evaluate those and analyze. Is it using some kind of an AI ML engine, or is it more of like a logic-based algorithm? You know what I mean? Is it, if you have any
Yeah, so
idea around that?
I don't know off the top of my head, but if Catherine has joined from product management team, I think she said she might be able to jump on second half. She could certainly field a question like that, but I don't know. I've seen
Yeah.
it in presentations. Oh, she's there.
Hey, Kevin.
Hi.
Yeah, so we're looking at flow patterns and making recommendations based upon the flow patterns. We are in the future looking at machine learning to quickly identify which areas are considered infrastructure services. You'll also notice like the public IP addresses, the unknown groups, like we already put some standard groups on the canvas just to kind of segregate things out a little bit better on the visualization front. So I do have a call to action ask for anyone here. If we wanted to proceed with machine learning and really make a huge dent into more better recommendations, we do need some customer participation. So if you have customers that are willing to share any of their flow information with us, feel free to drop me an email and we can have some of those discussions with you and your customer.
Great. Thanks, Catherine.
All right. Thanks, Catherine. And I'm glad you're here too, so you can keep me honest for the rest of this presentation in case I'm giving any kind of false information. Thanks for jumping on. So anyway, we now have started that recommendation and it says ready to publish. And like I said, this is the coolest part of NSX Intelligence and what I think is the most powerful and it's going to help our customers the most outside of the visualization is the actual creation of security policy and the way it works. So once this is ready to publish, we just come in and we click on this and it gives it to us in the same format that the distributed firewall is already in and presents it to us in a way that is very easily editable, and we can change everything right here and then go publish this. So this is basically what I'm going to do and kind of just walk everybody through the process. So it has gone through and kind of created its own grouping and services if need be. It picks up the services that are there, so on and so forth. But we can clearly see right out of the gate here, and I didn't tell it to do this, right? It did it on its own, is that it has created this rule called Rule 3, and it has grouped some VMs together and said group 4 is our source, and then it's grouped some other VMs together and said group 1 is our destination, and then it's used the existing HTTPS service, and it has made it an allow rule, and then it has applied that back to those two groups. So we can go through and see, right? So this essentially is my client access rule that I manually created before, just done in a little bit different way with the NSX Intelligence appliance, right? So we can go ahead and rename this, if I spell it right, client access right here within the GUI. And then we can go in and we can look at this group that it's created and created group 4, TAM member 0 VM. Oh, and this is 0 VMs because essentially this is an any group. So it knows that this could be coming from anywhere, right? Which is what it's essentially created. So instead of letting that be a group with nothing in it, I can decide to just delete that group and hit save, which now makes that an any rule. Now this next group that it's created should, in theory, be our web servers, right? Because that would be the target. So if we go look at the two VMs that it is intelligently grouped together, look, it's grouped our Web 01A and our Web 02A together because it has seen that traffic and knows, those are the flows that are happening. Now, another cool part here is I can say, as a user, I've already created this group, so I don't necessarily want to use the group that this is trying to create. So I can go to other available groups, and then I can choose my 3-tier web group that I know those VMs already reside in, and I can go ahead and click save there. And then because I'm not using the homemade groups anymore, I probably want to just go ahead and let this apply to the distributed firewall for now. So you can very easily change these rules on the fly, basically before you do a publication, if you will. So this one here, what is this service one? So I'm actually curious to see what it made this service one. All right, so So there's the firewall rules portion here, which then is the rules that's made up of the groups and the services and everything. And then here are the recommended groups that it's created as part of this as well. So you can come through and see that. And then these, once again, you can edit, you can rename, you can include, disclude members if you want as part of that. And then you can go see the recommended services that it's created as well. And Catherine, that's the first time I've seen it make this service, this Apple One service, but I can't find it in recommended services, so I'm not sure what that one is.
That doesn't look like something we created because it would have appended or added a suffix to that name.
All right, let's go back later and see what that is. I'll make a note of that over here on my other screen. That's the first time I've seen it do that, but I think you came on late. I had a power outage today, so my NSX manager and my NSX Intelligence appliance were down most of the day, so I may run into that other challenge that we've talked about in the past. But anyway, the point here is I can go through and I can, I can delete these rules, I can create new rules, I can edit, what has been recommended to me, for example. And then when I'm all done, I can simply hit next. And it is going to then ask me where I want to place this new security policy. I can put it here at the top. I can put it down underneath one of these others. And then in working with the product management team and Catherine, I have made a request that was already there. And that was, can we take these rules and include them into an existing security policy as opposed to creating a new one every time? And the answer is yes, that's on the roadmap from what I understand. And then the other thing that I had from another customer as a feature request was to have, instead of a publish button, have an export button to be able to export out the JSON code or the scripting to then take this and run it through an automation engine and apply it instead of actually using this engine here. And from what I understand, that is also on the roadmap. Is that correct, Catherine?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So now if I hit publish, it says, are you sure? I said, yeah. And it says everything's been published. So now if we hit close and we come back to our security distributed firewall, we see that this policy one now exists. It says in progress. It should go green here in just a minute. There we are, we're up. And if we expand this out, it now has those 3 rules that are assigned to the groups that were created, as well as the 1 rule that I've made the modifications to, and we are in the allow state. So in a normal environment that hasn't been shut down for an extended period of time, if we were to wait a few minutes and then come back to our plan and troubleshoot, discover and take action, we should now see all of those flows in the last hour start turning to green. But then that'll bring me to the 2 challenges that I found in my home lab with this, one of which we just opened a PR for with Catherine. Thank you. I saw that came through, by the way, in the bug report. Is that if the NSX Intelligence machine is down for, is it more than like 4 hours, Catherine?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, if the NSX Intelligence machine is powered off for more than 4 hours, it loses some relationships between a couple of its own internal databases. And then essentially tech support has to come in and massage it back to life. But from what I understand, that's something that is already fixed in the pre-release code, and the next GA release will have that fix in there, correct?
Yeah, NSX-T 251, which is coming out in a week.
Gotcha. Perfect. So that challenge is already being addressed, and I hit that one last week working with the team. And unfortunately, instead of going through the big, long, lengthy process with support, getting things fixed, I just redeployed within my environment to get around that. And then the other thing that I've seen as far as an issue in my environment, and I don't know if it's specific to my environment, and this is the one I wrote up to you, Catherine, is that once this is deployed, if we go to certificates, there is a certificate associated with this NSX Intelligence machine here within the environment. And let me pull my slide deck up here real quick. So this gets into those issues that I've encountered. So when I would redeploy my NSX Intelligence machine after I delete the deployment, I go back to redeploy it, and then I watch that same log. I would get this registration failed, and then I would get an error in here that was complaining about certificates somewhere in here. So what I found for a workaround was that, I tried to go in and delete this certificate that existed in NSX Manager, and it would give me an error saying it cannot be deleted. So I just changed the DNS record in my environment, and I redeploy NSX Intelligence as a different name. And once I do that and everything comes up and it's happy, it changes the name. And I don't know if it just reuses the certificate or deletes the certificate that's in there and redeploys it. But that's how I've been able to work around that in my lab. So from a home lab perspective, if you guys deploy NSX Intelligence, you delete the deployment and you try to redeploy and it's not syncing up and not working. What I have found is if you deploy it with a different name, then it works just fine the second time, and then you can go back and use the original name again. So I just keep bouncing back and forth between M1-NSX-Intelligence and M1-NSX-INTELL and just truncate the name. So it's the two challenges I found in my home lab. So I think I've got about 9 minutes left, and that's pretty much what I had as far as a demo goes, and how NSX Intelligence works and how I've installed and how I use it in my home lab. So if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer it or dig into anything. And Catherine's on, I'm sure she's happy to answer questions as well.
I got a quick question. So as you're going through the recommendations and after it does its analysis and now you're reviewing those and making modifications, is there a way to, rather than publish immediately, like save that for later, right? You review it, you make modifications to it, you get it the way you want it, and then I'm thinking, like, in my head, you would want to save that, run that through some change management process before it officially gets published, and then come back and publish it later. You know what I mean? Is that possible?
Yes. So the answer is yes. All those changes that I made, if I would have just hit save instead of publish,
okay,
all the changes would have existed in this entity right here that says ready to publish. But once you publish it, I found there's no editing, right? So I can't come in and change any of these now that I've published it, because it's something that's been published. But yes, if we do another one, I can do it kick off a quick recommendation.
Well, real quick, before you move off that page, can you hit down arrow on that one recommendation? Does it show who published? I think that would be also interesting, just from an audit perspective, right?
Oh, I gotcha. That's a good question for Catherine. So I don't have, I'm just logging in as admin.
Yeah.
NSX manager in general. So I'm not using the Active Directory integration through Identity Manager as of yet. But if we were to do this through Identity Manager, Catherine, would it show all those rules,
No, we don't have a column for who published today, no.
Okay.
Is that something that's on the roadmap?
It is not currently on the roadmap.
Okay. Is that something that's been listed as a feature request?
We can add it right now.
That was be my next question. If not, that's a very good one.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways, and as you guys are doing your demos and hearing back from customers, there's a couple different ways in which you can follow this feedback. One is you can open up a PR and follow it that way. Another is to drop myself an email or Kausam Kumar an email and just let us know, like, who the customer is, why it's important, and some additional information. And what we do is convert that into a JIRA ticket for the next release.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Fantastic. And so one other thing I didn't point out, and I just did here, is that even without using the visualization portion or the discover and take action, you can come straight to recommendations and say start a new recommendation, and then select the virtual machines that you want to be part of that recommendation and select the time frame and everything else. So you don't have to go through the visual side if you already know what you want to target in order to build a security policy around. So I went ahead and did that, and I also did this to where I could show you where we can save it here in a moment and without publishing, right?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Anything else, question-wise?
I don't see anything in the chat or Q&A. If anyone has questions or comments, feel free to unmute yourself. I do see this being a little bit similar to like app defense, right? Where we go through a period where we're just watching and learning the application and how they behave, right? It's similar to that in my head. That's how I'm kind of making it make sense to myself.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think the real powerful part here is for customers that are planning out microsegmentation, obviously, and getting ready to, go down that route. And it's, making good recommendations from what I've seen. I've done more than just the 3-tier app in my home lab and kind of tested to see what it spits out. And, it seems to be pretty solid. I mean, just like anything else, it's still going to take a little bit of human intelligence and a little bit of tweaking before you press that publish button, but it takes a lot of the work out of the process, right?
Yeah. I also see it being really valuable where maybe you enter all the firewall rules manually, but then you do an analysis afterwards just to make sure there wasn't anything that maybe the application teams didn't think about or realize, right? To catch those things that maybe it's talking on some other port real quick every once in a while. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
It's a,
and that's, instead of using the concept of like catch-all rule that we've been doing kind of historically, right? Where you go create all your rules and then you come in here and say, okay, show me my unprotected flows, right? I'm still in blacklist mode. I'm still allowing the traffic to pass. Now show me what's still happening that I'm not aware of, right?
Yeah, I could see it being extremely valuable with those really large applications. And I have somewhat of a healthcare background, so Epic comes to mind, right? Where there's just components and different tiers all over the place. This would be extremely valuable to help kind of map everything out and make sure you get the right rules in place for everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, so there's this continue. It's not a save button, but it's continue later. So once I press that,
perfect.
Yeah, so it's changed. It's saved my edit. So I just changed this to test. I don't know if you caught that, and then said continue later.
Yeah, perfect.
And then it keeps that. So yeah, to your point, you could come in here and you could reconfigure and do whatever, and then take screenshots because I don't know that we can. Actually, there's another one for Catherine.
Yeah, export is on our feature request list.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So, because my question though was going to be, is there through the API calls today, like once I go through and edit this and say continue later, is there any kind of API call right now that I can go pull all of this information out that's part of this recommendation?
So today we don't have a NSX Intelligence API exposed. It is in our roadmap to expose it. So you could start a recommendation, save recommendation, export recommendation through the API, but that's later in our roadmap.
Okay, very good.
So one more question, and I'm pretty sure I don't know the answer to this, but there's no way to use NSX Intelligent without using NSX, right? Because it's all using that data.
So we are tied to the hip with NSX Intelligence NSX Manager, because we're actually having components on the host as part of the VIB install component of it. So when we talk about distributed analytics, it's really about how we're collecting the flows, deduping them right at the host before sending them over into the NSX Intelligence appliance for analytics. So we can't really decouple ourselves from NSX Manager.
Sure.
So you have to have the VIBs installed and host prep.
Yep, that's what I figured, just clarifying. All right, we've got about 1 minute left. Anybody on the line got any questions or comments or any interesting use cases that come to mind with your customers? I'm sure Catherine would love to hear that.
Yeah, so as you guys are going through these demos with your customers, feel free to involve any of the product managers. We'd be happy to help you guys out.
Excellent.
Cool. Yeah, and likewise, feel free to reach out to me. I've done one for a couple different customers, and I think, Catherine, this is the first time you've seen my demo. This is real similar. I skipped this is how I installed it in my home lab, but I do the whole 3-tier app portion for customers, and this is pretty good in the message that we're trying to pass on then?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, last call. Anybody got any comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll end the session here. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you, Catherine, for joining as well. This has been really good. So excited to see this product and how it moves forward.
All right. Pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much for everyone who joined, and thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. Have a good week. Take care.